Ever since Capcom first revealed Pragmata back in 2020, it's been one of my most anticipated games. After years of delays and countless periods of silence, it finally launched this April. I finished the game, spent some time reflecting on it, and now it's finally time to answer one question. Was it worth the wait? Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Only Thing Gaming channel. As I mentioned, Capcom's mysterious new IP went through development hell before hitting store shelves. My expectations were sky high for two reasons. Capcom has been on a roll lately, and the playable demo back in December completely hooked me. In this video, we're going to break down every aspect of Pragmata to see if that first impression held up across the entire campaign. We'll also dive into the heavy controversy surrounding Diana's character, and at the very end, I'll compare my final thoughts against my initial impressions of the demo. Without further ado, let's get right into it. Pragmata doesn't try to reinvent storytelling. On paper, it's a fairly straightforward sci-fi adventure. Hugh arrives at a 3D printed lunar station after something goes terribly wrong, becomes separated from his team, and finds himself hunted by robots manufactured by Edis. But everything changes once he meets Diana.
Your turn. Just, what are you?
I am DI-03367, a state-of-the-art pragmata created here at the Cradle. I possess basic life-saving protocols.
Okay, that's enough. I don't need the user's manual.
While the narrative is simple, the dynamic between Hugh and Diana really makes the story enjoyable and unique. Diana is a brilliantly written character. The writer struck a perfect, delicate balance. She is simultaneously a hyper-advanced AI weapon and an innocent, curious child. Because of this unique duality, she can switch from a deadly combat asset to acting like a silly kid in a way that feels completely organic and endearing. One moment she's helping Hugh dismantle an entire army of robots, and the next she's asking innocent questions about life on Earth, teasing him, or getting excited over the smallest things. Somehow, those two sides never feel inconsistent. Instead, they complement each other perfectly. Their conversations quickly became one of my favorite parts of the entire game. Despite being a fairly linear experience, Pragmata contains a surprising amount of optional dialogue. Even after finishing the game, I still come across interactions online that I somehow missed during my own playthrough. These conversations do more than fill the silence between combat encounters. Sometimes, Diana wants to learn more about Hugh and his life before arriving on the moon. Sometimes she asks questions that only a child would think to ask. Other times she notices when Hugh is struggling emotionally and genuinely tries to comfort him. And of course, there are plenty of moments where she simply annoys him in the way only a child can. Those little interactions make both characters feel incredibly human, even though one of them isn't human at all. As the story progresses, Hugh slowly shifts from simply protecting Diana because she's useful to genuinely caring about her well-being. Their relationship evolves naturally, and by the end of the game, it feels less like two strangers working together and more like a father-daughter or perhaps an older brother and younger sister. That emotional connection is what gives the story its heart. Without Diana, I honestly think Pragmata's narrative would have been fairly forgettable. The main mystery is interesting enough to keep you moving forward, but it isn't the reason I wanted to see what happened next. I kept playing because I wanted to spend more time with these two characters. Their chemistry transforms what could have been another generic sci-fi adventure into something genuinely charming. It's no surprise that I've seen people online affectionately refer to the game as Dad Space, because that description fits surprisingly well. It's proof that you don't always need a complex plot full of shock and twist to tell an engaging story. Sometimes, strong character writing is enough, and thankfully, Pragmata delivers exactly that. If the story is what gives Pragmata its heart, then the gameplay is what kept me hooked from beginning to end. At its core, Pragmata is a third-person shooter, but Capcom didn't settle for making just another cover-based action game. Instead, They built the entire combat system around one simple idea: shooting alone isn't enough. Almost every enemy in the game is protected by an electronic shield. Before you can deal meaningful damage, Diana has to hack that enemy and expose its weak points. On paper, it sounds like it could slow the pace of combat, but in practice, it's one of the most satisfying mechanics I've experienced in a shooter in quite some time. The reason it works so well is because of how seamlessly it's integrated into the controls. I played Pragmata using an Xbox controller, and I genuinely think Capcom designed one of the smartest control schemes I've seen in years. Whenever you aim at an enemy, Diana's hacking interface appears on screen, while Hugh continues aiming, moving, and shooting normally with the analog sticks and triggers. You simultaneously guide Diana through the hacking matrix using the four face buttons X, Y, A, and B. It sounds overwhelming when you explain it, but after only a few encounters, it becomes second nature. Instead of interrupting the action, hacking becomes part of the rhythm of combat. You're constantly shooting, dodging attacks, planning your movement, and solving a small puzzle at the same time. It's a balancing act that sounds chaotic, yet somehow feels incredibly intuitive. Each hacking path is different. Your goal is to reach the enemy's core while passing through as many useful nodes as possible along the way. Some nodes simply increase the amount of damage you'll deal after the hack is complete. Others give you temporary bonuses like multi-hack, decode, or other useful effect that can completely change the outcome of a fight. Depending on the enemy and the situation, you might decide to take the shortest route for speed or spend a little longer navigating the grid to maximize your damage output. That constant decision making keeps every encounter engaging. Hacking isn't just an offensive tool either. Certain enemies fire guided missiles that can be reflected back at them through successful hacks, turning their own attacks against them. It's another small mechanic that adds variety and prevents combat from becoming repetitive. Enemy variety also deserves a lot of credit. Throughout the game, Capcom constantly introduced new robot types that force you to rethink your approach. Some enemies are fast and aggressive, constantly closing the distance before you have time to hack them. Others bombard you with projectiles from across the room. Some feature more complicated hacking patterns, while others require you to destroy specific components before Diana can even begin hacking. Because of that, fights rarely feel like you're repeating the same encounter over and over again. You're always adapting. The game also introduces several mechanics gradually instead of overwhelming you all at once, and that's something I really appreciated. Nearly every few chapters, there's a new enemy, a new combat mechanic, or a new tool that slightly changes how you approach battles. One mechanic I found myself relying on quite a bit was the override protocol. It's one of the strongest abilities in the game, capable of turning difficult encounters completely in your favor, but filling the override gauge requires a lot of successful hacking, which means deciding when to activate it becomes an important tactical decision. Use it too early, and you might regret not having it later. Wait too long, and you risk making an encounter much harder than it needs to be. I also like the fact that repeated hacks help refill the meter, encouraging you to keep engaging with the hacking mechanics instead of ignoring them. Later on, you can even unlock auto hack through the skill tree, allowing Diana to perform hacks automatically by consuming the override gauge. Normally, I wouldn't be a fan of automating a mechanic that's so central to the gameplay, but in this case, I found it surprisingly useful. During smaller encounters or while backtracking through earlier areas, it speeds up the pacing without completely replacing the core gameplay. Boss fights are another highlight. Rather than simply throwing larger health bars at you, almost every major boss introduces a unique mechanic or a new twist on the hacking system. Some bosses feature entirely different weak point mechanics, others require you to interact with the arena itself. A few even incorporate cinematic QuickTime events that help make those encounters feel memorable. Some encounters genuinely reminded me of Resident Evil, whether it was the boss designs, the environmental layouts, the safe rooms before major encounters, or even the way certain enemies grab you. You can clearly see Capcom's design philosophy shining through. It doesn't feel like Resident Evil in space. It feels like Capcom taking decades of experience designing action games and applying those lessons to an entirely new IP. The combat continues evolving almost until the very end of the game. One of my favorite mechanics introduced later on is overheating enemies. Once a robot has overheated, you can perform a devastating critical attack that instantly finishes it off. It's incredibly satisfying to pull off and gives later encounters even more variety. Near the end of the game, Capcom introduced another mechanic involving dead filament and Diana's ability to cleanse it. Without going into spoiler territory, these enemies are significantly tougher because their weak points remain hidden until Diana removes the corruption. It forces you to prioritize cleansing before attacking, creating some of the most challenging encounters in the game. I'd love to discuss those sections in more detail, but they're tied too closely to late game story developments, so I'll leave them for you to experience yourself. Another feature that really impressed me is how the game handles failure. Whenever you die, Diana often comments on what happened and gives you subtle hints about the enemy or encounter that defeated you. It's a small detail, but it makes retrying encounters feel much less frustrating while naturally pointing players toward better strategies without stopping the game to throw tutorials at them.
You remember that floaty watcher bot thing that was shooting at us? Its laser sensor shows where it's aiming. You just have to move at the right time.
Easier said than done.
Weapon variety is another area where Pragmata succeeds. Your primary firearm serves as your reliable weapon throughout the game and automatically reloads over time. Alongside it, you have three categories of consumable equipment: offensive, defensive, and tactical weapons. Rather than relying on traditional ammunition, these tools must either be found while exploring the station or printed later inside the shelter. And speaking of the shelter, it's much more than just a safe room. It's essentially your home base throughout the adventure. Here, you can upgrade Hugh's health, improve Diana's hacking abilities, enhance your primary weapon, browse the database, complete optional challenges, and spend resources you've collected during exploration. Resources like Lunam and Lunafilament allow you to purchase new skills, expand your mod capacity, unlock additional thruster abilities, and improve many of your consumable weapons. Not every upgrade has to be purchased, though. Some abilities are unlocked naturally through story progression, such as the ability to carry two weapons from each consumable category instead of one. It gives progression a satisfying mix of player choice and natural rewards. Exploration isn't the game's primary focus, but there's still enough optional content to reward players who take their time. Escape hatches scattered throughout the station make returning to the shelter quick and convenient, while optional side paths frequently reward curious players with resources, collectibles, or valuable mods. There are even a few light Metroidvania elements. Occasionally, you'll unlock abilities that allow you to revisit previous areas and access places that were previously unreachable. It's not a major part of the game's design, and I wouldn't recommend extensive backtracking unless you're aiming for 100% completion, but it's a nice addition nonetheless. Some hidden areas require new traversal abilities, others rely on platforming, and a few are hidden behind holographic walls that are surprisingly easy to overlook. One of my favorite pieces of optional content is the Red Rooms. These locked combat arenas require special keys to enter. Once inside, you're trapped until every enemy has been defeated. The fights can be intense, but the rewards are more than worth the effort, often providing some of the best resources in the game. There's also rare robots hidden throughout the station that drop valuable rewards when destroyed. These enemies disappear if you miss them, meaning you'll need to reload the area to make them spawn again. The rewards are valuable enough that hunting them down always feels worthwhile. I also enjoyed spotting Capcom's little references scattered throughout the world. Fans of Resident Evil will probably notice several nods. including references like Wesker Productions and a few environmental details that clearly pay tribute to Capcom's other franchises. That said, not every gameplay system is a success. The scannability, while useful, removes much of the excitement from exploration. With the press of a single button, you can instantly identify almost every interactable object nearby. Instead of carefully searching your surroundings, exploration often turns into repeatedly activating the scanner until everything has been highlighted. It makes discovering secrets feel far less rewarding than it could have been. My biggest criticism, however, is the difficulty. Unfortunately, Pragmata only offers casual and standard difficulties on a first playthrough. The much harder lunatic difficulty is locked until you've already completed the game. I played on standard, and for the vast majority of the experience, it simply wasn't challenging enough. Outside of a handful of late game encounters, I rarely felt pressured to fully utilize the game's excellent mechanics. Many fights could be won by relying on the same basic strategy instead of experimenting with all the different tools, consumables, and abilities the game gives you. It's a shame because the combat system is deep enough to support a much greater challenge right from the start. Even so, that's a criticism born from how much I enjoyed the mechanics. When a game introduces combat systems this creative and satisfying, I naturally want the difficulty to push me into mastering them. And thankfully, even on standard difficulty, the game never stopped being fun. Before we move on with the review, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your thoughts in the comment section. Visually, Pragmata is a gorgeous game. It may not take you through dozens of wildly different locations, but Capcom makes excellent use of the environments it does have. The RE engine continues to impress, delivering highly detailed environments, realistic lighting, and some genuinely stunning reflections that make the lunar station feel both futuristic and believable. Ray tracing plays a huge role here, whether it's polished floors, glass panels, metallic corridors, or reflective laboratory equipment. Lighting behaves naturally throughout the station. These surfaces constantly react to the environment around them, adding an extra layer of realism that helps sell the atmosphere. It's one of those games where you occasionally stop for a moment just to admire how good everything looks. Although the majority of the adventure takes place inside a lunar research station, Capcom still manages to introduce enough visual variety to keep the environments from becoming repetitive. You'll occasionally come across areas that completely change the scenery, including locations with beaches, vegetation, and open spaces. Even then, the game never loses its identity or makes you forget that you're still exploring a facility built on the moon. It strikes a nice balance between variety and consistency. Character models are equally impressive. Facial animations are expressive enough to sell the emotional moments between Hugh and Diana, while the quality of their materials and textures holds up well even during close-up cinematics. Diana, in particular, benefits from excellent animation work. Her expressions, body language, and subtle movements constantly reinforce her personality. Whether she's curious, excited, worried, or simply teasing Hugh, the animation does an excellent job bringing her character to life. Capcom also deserves credit for its strand-based hair technology. Hair movement looks natural throughout both gameplay and cutscenes, avoiding the stiff appearance that many games still struggle with. It's not a feature that dramatically changes the experience, but it's another example of the attention to detail that's present across the entire presentation. The visual effects are equally strong. Explosions feel impactful, hacking effects are clean without becoming visually overwhelming, and combat remains readable even during larger encounters with multiple enemies attacking at once. That's something I really appreciate because games with lots of visual effects can sometimes become difficult to follow in the middle of combat. Thankfully, Pragmata never falls into that trap. Now, visuals are only half the equation. No matter how impressive a game looks, it still needs to perform well. So let's move to the benchmarks, and remember, you can skip to the timestamps on screen if you're not interested. As you saw from the benchmarks, Pragmata is another excellent example of Capcom's optimization. The game ran remarkably well throughout my playthrough, maintaining stable performance on mid-range hardware without requiring aggressive compromises to image quality. Reaching 60 frames per second isn't particularly difficult, and players who need additional performance have several options available. The game supports AMD FSR, NVIDIA DLSS, frame generation, and of course, lowering or disabling ray tracing if you need the extra headroom. It's always nice to see modern PC releases offering multiple scaling technologies instead of forcing players into a single solution. More importantly, the experience simply felt smooth. Performance remained consistent for the overwhelming majority of my playthrough, and I rarely encountered noticeable frame drops during actual gameplay. The only slowdowns I experienced usually occurred while entering completely new areas, where the game would briefly stutter before immediately returning to normal performance. Fortunately, these moments were both rare and short enough that they never became distracting. If anything, they felt more like hidden loading transitions than genuine performance issues. Outside of those occasional hiccups, I have very few complaints regarding the technical side of the game. Considering the visual quality Capcom managed to achieve, the optimization is genuinely impressive. Unfortunately, that's becoming increasingly rare in today's AAA market, where many games launch with serious technical problems that take months to fix. Thankfully, Pragmata isn't one of them. From a technical standpoint, this is a polished PC release that respects your hardware instead of fighting against it. And honestly, after so many disappointing PC launches over the past few years, that's something I think deserves recognition. So, after spending more than 15 hours with Pragmata, I think you've probably already figured out where I stand. This game was one of my most anticipated releases for years, and after everything we heard about it, the delays, the long periods of silence, and all the uncertainty surrounding its development, I honestly wasn't sure if it could live up to the expectations I'd built in my head. Surprisingly, it did. In fact, I'd go a step further and say it exceeded them. Before the game launched, I had the opportunity to play the demo, and I came away genuinely impressed. At the time, I thought that if Capcom could maintain the same level of quality throughout the full experience, Pragmata could end up being something really special. Here's what I said back then. But from what I experienced, the game blends combat and hacking mechanics in a very creative and satisfying way, and I didn't notice any major red flags. Performance was stable, and the game offered a wide range of settings. The narrative also looks promising, with strong chemistry between Hugh and Diana. However, the demo does handhold the player a bit, using a single scan button to guide progression, and I'm not going to judge anything from the demo, especially the combat. The full game will likely introduce more enemy types with resistances to hacking or other tools you might have. There are even weak point mechanics reminiscent of the Horizon series. Now that I've experienced the full game from beginning to end, I'm happy to say that those first impressions held up remarkably well. The full release delivers on everything the demo promised. The combat stays fresh by constantly introducing new mechanics and enemy types. The hacking system remains engaging from beginning to end. The relationship between Hugh and Diana becomes the emotional core of the experience, and perhaps most importantly, the game never feels like it's wasting your time. Sure, it's not perfect. The overall story is fairly straightforward. Exploration could have been more rewarding. The scan mechanic removes some of the excitement of discovering secrets, and I genuinely wish the harder difficulty had been available from the start instead of being locked behind New Game Plus. But none of those issues stopped me from enjoying the experience. If anything, they simply kept Pragmata from reaching absolute perfection. For me, this is one of those rare games where the positives constantly outweigh the negatives. It's creative, it's polished, it's mechanically satisfying, and above all else, it's memorable. Now, before ending the review, I want to briefly address one topic that surrounded this game after release. Some people criticized Pragmata simply because they disliked the relationship between Hugh and Diana. Others went even further, accusing people who enjoyed the game of having questionable motives, claiming that Diana's character somehow exists to appeal to a particular fantasy. Personally, I don't agree with that interpretation at all. Throughout the entire game, Diana is portrayed exactly as she is meant to be, an AI with the curiosity, innocence, and emotional development of a child. The relationship between Hugh and Diana is built on trust, responsibility, and genuine care. It's the emotional foundation that makes the story work. There's nothing strange about enjoying a well written protective relationship between two characters. In fact, we've seen similar dynamics in games, movies, and television for decades because they naturally create emotional investment. At the end of the day, I think it's much healthier to judge the game based on what it actually presents rather than on assumptions made outside of it. If you connected with Hugh and Diana's journey the same way I did, then that's all that really matters. Don't let online discourse stop you from enjoying something you genuinely like, especially when so much of that discourse comes from people who either haven't played the game or are more interested in arguing than discussing it. What makes Pragmata stand out isn't just its mechanics or its visuals, it's the confidence behind its design. At a time when so many publishers rely almost exclusively on sequels, remakes, and established franchises, Capcom decided to invest in an entirely new IP. That alone deserves recognition. Even more impressive is the fact that they didn't simply play it safe. Instead of making another conventional third person shooter, they built an entirely new combat system around the idea of controlling two characters simultaneously, and somehow made it feel intuitive from the very beginning. That's exactly the kind of creativity I'd like to see more often from the industry. So, if you're looking for a polished linear action game with satisfying combat, memorable characters, excellent optimization, and one of the most creative gameplay systems I've played in recent years, I can comfortably recommend Pragmata. It isn't flawless, but it's one of the best linear action games I've played in a long time, and without a doubt, one of my favorite releases of the year. I'd love to see Capcom build on this foundation in a sequel, but even if that never happens, I'd still consider Pragmata a successful new franchise and one that absolutely justified the years of waiting. If you've played the game, let me know what you thought in the comments below. Did you enjoy it as much as I did, or do you think it fell short of the hype? I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this review, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and consider sharing the video if you think someone else might find it helpful. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.